It was front-page news around the world. A megastar accused of assault and sexual crimes, including kidnapping, threats of violence, firearms offences, drugs and coercion. Sean Combs, a.k.a. P Diddy, is one of the biggest figures in hip-hop, both as an artist and a producer for the likes of Mariah Carey, Jennifer Lopez, Usher and the notorious B.I.G. One man is representing those accusing Sean Combs, a multimillionaire lawyer who lives in one of the most expensive houses in Houston, Texas.
I'm trying to simplify my life. Of course, this Diddy case doesn't simplify my life very much.
And our man Mick Brown has interviewed him and joins us today to tell us the story of a journey to the US to meet Tony Buzbee. Welcome to the Daily Tea with me, Kamal Ahmed. Earlier this year, the 54-year-old rapper and businessman Sean Diddy Combs was arrested after facing a wave of civil lawsuits related to allegations including sex trafficking, racketeering conspiracy and rape. He will stay in jail until his trial in May next year after being denied bail 3 times. The rapper has been accused of abusing and blackmailing multiple women with the help of associates and employees for over 15 years. Lawyers for Combs have denied all the allegations, saying Mr. Combs and his legal team have full confidence in the facts, their legal defences and the integrity of the judicial process. In court, the truth will prevail that Mr. Combs has never sexually assaulted anyone, adult or minor, man or woman. And then earlier this month, an amended lawsuit filed in a federal court in New York alleged that rap stars Jay-Z and Combs raped a 13-year-old girl during a party in 2000. An allegation that Jay-Z has denied, calling it a blackmail attempt. In his statement, Jay-Z said, "These allegations are so heinous in nature that I implore you to file a criminal complaint, not a civil one. Whomever would commit such a crime against a minor should be locked away. Would you not agree? These alleged victims would deserve real justice if that were the case." This lawyer, who I have done a bit of research on, seems to have a pattern of these types of theatrics. Well, the man that Jay-Z was referring to is Tony Buzbee, the man you heard at the start of the podcast, a Texas lawyer who is representing the women who filed the lawsuit against Jay-Z, and Mr. Buzbee has also filed at least 20 civil lawsuits against Combs, accusing him of sexual misconduct. He has used social media, a phone hotline, and a news conference to find clients to represent in these cases. He is certainly some character. Well, I'm joined by somebody who's met him, Mick Brown,
Hello,
our
Kamal.
fabulous interviewer for The Telegraph, who went to America to interview Tony Buzbee. Mick, welcome to the Daily Tea.
Thank you.
Your wonderful interview you can read on The Telegraph's website and in the paper tomorrow. Just kick us off with your journey to see Tony Buzbee and the kind of person he is.
Well, I flew to Houston a couple of weeks back, having already spoken to him on the phone and him having agreed to see me. He doesn't give a lot of full-length interviews. I mean, he's very quick to quote on cases, and he's very quick to fire off bullet points, as it were. But it's a long time since I think he gave a full-length interview of the kind that he gave to me. So I went to his home in Houston's most expensive neighborhood. He lives in one of the biggest houses on one of the most expensive streets in the most expensive neighborhood in Houston.
And there's a lot of money in Houston. That's oil.
There's a
That's
lot
oil
of money.
country.
This is oil. This is oil country. And this indeed is how Tony Buzbee, as a personal injury lawyer, has made most of his money by suing oil companies and rigging companies around the Gulf Coast. A lot of damages from oil rig workers who've been injured, and the BP oil spill, Deepwater Horizon oil spill, which of course affected thousands of people around the coast, not just oil rig workers, but restaurateurs and fishermen and all sorts of people. He took an enormous amount of money from BP in personal injury cases for that. He's an extraordinary character. I mean, he's somebody who lives large. And if you wanted to imagine a brash, self-confident Texas lawyer, he fits the bill. And he has a great reputation, certainly within Texas and certainly within the American law field, for being a very abrasive, very hard-nosed, very confrontational lawyer in the way he wins cases. He was once described by a Texas magazine as mean, ambitious, tenacious, and fire-breathing. And a fellow attorney has called him the biggest, baddest, meanest dog in the yard. And when I put that to Tony Buzbee, he kind of laughed and said, "Oh, they're just trying to make me happy." So he's not someone who's tried to play down this reputation.
It comes across in your article. He's almost this sort of, as you say, this lawyer from Central Casting. We'll come on in the second half of the podcast to the very serious case he's involved in now. I also loved the anecdotes he told you about his involvement in the BP case, and we'll come on to that as well. But just to kick us off, Mick, as you say in the piece, his house is full of amazing art. It's a beautiful. They've got beautiful Art Deco furniture and sculpture, and so he's obviously astonishingly successful. But he didn't start there.
He certainly didn't. No, he grew up very poor in a small town in North Texas. His father was a butcher, and his mother worked in the school cafeteria. And he described his father as big and mean. And his father was self-evidently a bully who made everybody's life a misery. And when Buzbee was 8 or 9 years old, he'd say, "Get in the truck, boy." And they drive off and drive the dirt roads around town collecting beer cans, discarded beer cans.
He'd slow down, I'd jump out, pick up a can, throw it in the back, jump back in, we'd keep going. We'd do that for hours because he would sell the aluminum.
Okay.
As you know, nowadays they call that a side hustle, but this is what he did to earn extra money. He also would, during deer season, there's a season that usually starts the first weekend in November in Texas. We had a little processing plant in the back of the house, and he would cut and process people's deer meat. Just things he did. He would grow tomatoes and watermelons and cantaloupes, and so we'd sell them. Or we would haul hay, go out and haul hay all day long, and 25 cents a bale. And he was not very nice about it. A lot of times he'd be sitting in the shade drinking his Budweiser beer while I was out there doing all the work, and he would yell at me. But on those Saturdays, we would drive for hours, all the back roads, picking up beer cans. We'd end up with, back end full of beer cans.
And then take them off to be sold for the aluminium. And then the father would retreat to the local bar with the 8 or 9 year old Buzbee in tow. And he'd spend the rest of the day shooting pool and drinking with his buddies while Buzbee sat there in the corner. And in the course of our conversation, he was describing this. And just sort of out of the blue, really, he said, talking of his father, he said, he wrestled a bear and he fought a dwarf. And I said, what? And he told me the story. And his father had indeed wrestled a bear and fought a dwarf.
I watched it happen. The dwarf kicked him in the shins. My dad takes pool serious, like super serious. And every time my dad would get ready to shoot, the dwarf would hit his stick. And my dad got annoyed pretty quick.
Sure.
And my dad finally says, "Hey," and put his hand on his chest and just kind of moved him out of the way. Get on out of the way. Well, the dwarf didn't take too kindly to that. Just kicked him right in the shin. And, you could see my dad saw stars. And he just whack, hit this dwarf right across his face and knocked him into the wall. And he just goes, collapsed. And then the bartender, there's only one guy in there, bartender comes around and says, "Hey, look up," and grabs the dwarf and helps him get up and then waddles him on out of there, outside. As we were leaving, the dwarf was sitting in a truck, passed out with his head like this on the steering wheel, and the sun was coming in and he already had a sunburnt face.
Oh my God.
That's the last time I ever saw him. True story.
That's an incredible story.
So he wrestled a bear at a bar once. They had a bear they brought around, and you pay $20, and it had a muzzle on it, and you could wrestle it, and nobody could beat the bear. And my dad wrestled it. Bear beat him real easy.
quite incredible window on American life, on poor American life in the time that Tony Buzbee was a child. As you said, Mick, he was involved in this huge case against the oil giant BP after the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. I remember covering it here at the Telegraph as the business editor, knowing all the characters involved. Lord Brown was the chairman of BP. Just take us through his involvement in that case.
Well, he was representing a large number of people who were affected by that. People who lived along the Gulf Coast where the oil spill had gone. Small businesses, fishermen, people like that. And so he brought a number of cases against BP representing these people. And he said at one point he actually tried to depose Lord Brown. And he said, you can imagine how much I was looking forward to meeting Lord Brown. I think he has a fondness for England. He referenced several times, as you might expect. And he told me a very interesting story about the negotiations that followed that. He was actually on his ranch in North Texas talking to a lawyer from BP. And there was this toing and froing about what the settlement was going to be. And the lawyer for BP said, well, we want to settle tomorrow. And Buzbee said, well, I don't have all the names in front of me. But he said, I can get them. And he drove back to the ranch. He was out driving around on the ranch. Drove back to the ranch, had his staff fax over all the names of the people in the case. Then drove to the highest point on the ranch so that he could actually get a phone signal. And then followed this extraordinary sort of debate where he's demanding $6 million, and the BP lawyer says, "I'll give you 4, and okay, we'll settle for 5.5." Just running through all of these cases. Then he went back to the ranch and told his wife, "I think I've settled all these cases." And she said, "This is extraordinary." And he numbered some extraordinary figure that he managed to secure, basically in the course of a long conversation with the BP lawyer, sitting in his Jeep, talking on his mobile phone. He's a very slick operator. And obviously a very efficient one, more than efficient. And he's won major cases in America. Not so well known here. There was a case against rapper Travis Scott over the Astro World. There was a big concert in Houston, Astro World, where people were killed and many people injured in a crowd surge. He won a big case against Travis Scott for that. I should say on behalf of his clients. He obviously made money from it, but he's winning it on behalf of the many clients whom he represented in that. More recently, he sued a well-known football player called Duchesne Watson, who played for the local team, the Houston local team, the Texans. And that was over a series of allegations made against Watson by female massage therapists whom Watson allegedly sexually abused. And he won a lot of money from Watson for that. And that actually resulted in Watson having to leave the Texans and move to Cleveland. Amusingly, the owner of the Texans football club lives directly opposite Tony Buzbee on this rather splendid street. You'd have to go there and see it. It's a very wonderful place. One might imagine that there'd be some animus between them, but he said no, it's all quite cordial. If he's out cycling or having a run, he'll wave to the owner of the Texans, and the owner of the Texans will wave back. So I think this is a world where people expect to sue each other.
It's sort of part of the relationship and part of the process.
It is
legal fighting.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And he told another amusing story about being at a dinner at an oil billionaire's house in the same neighborhood. And he wasn't married at that point. And he said he turned to his date, looking around, and said, "I think I've sued pretty much everybody in this room. You don't get a lot of love if you do that." Yeah. But this is how it goes.
As is so often the case as well, law and politics often mix.
Absolutely.
Great story you tell. He did stand to be mayor.
Yes.
Of Houston.
Yep.
And it's a great story you tell. Well, let's hear it in his voice, where he actually meets and campaigns for or raises funds for Donald Trump.
He was very, very not what I expected. I had my mother came. we sat in the kitchen, and the kids wanted autographs, and my mother wanted that. It took a lot of pictures. I don't think he realized, because you had to pay a certain amount of money to be in the main house, and you could pay a little less and be in the backyard.
Right.
And so there were like 700 people in the backyard, but there were like 40 in the main house. And so he was standing on the steps, and he's supposed to give a 10-minute speech inside and then go give his main speech outside, because the people inside would go out to the back tent to listen to the main speech. Well, nobody told him that, apparently, and he gave like his typical 45-minute speech, off the cuff, just rambling. And he was finished. He does this and finished, and I went and tugged on his. I said, hey, there's 700 people in the backyard. He goes, oh, right, yeah. So we went out in the back, gave the same damn speech. Off the cuff.
That was the first time he met Trump. But I understand he's met him a couple of times since then. He mentioned having dinner with him not that long ago. Buzbee's own attempts at a political career were not altogether successful. Many years ago, he was chairman of the Democratic Committee in Galveston and gave that up due, at the time, he said, to pressures of family and pressures of work and so forth. But then in 2017, he ran for mayor in Houston. As he said, spent $13 million on the campaign, but he lost that. And he sort of referenced the Trump money-raising event at his home. And I think he wasn't altogether sure that in the end was helpful to him, because, as he said, that will antagonize 40% of people who will think you're the Antichrist.
Did he say whether he ran for Democrat or Republican? Was he a Democrat he ran?
It was as a sort of...
Or is there a sort of non-political almost? I see. Yeah. Because he doesn't... In your piece, you explain he sort of doesn't come across as if he's a Trump supporter necessarily. He just wanted to do something that was about this guy raising money, and he thought this guy, he had just come off the latest successful Apprentice series, and he liked him as an entrepreneur.
Exactly.
And it wasn't that Tony Buzbee sort of supported Trump and all his works.
No, and I think he was told Ivanka might be coming, which he was very excited about.
It was just a novelty. Like, he was just coming off of The Apprentice, which I really liked. I thought it was a cool show, and I thought he was going to bring Ivanka. Honestly, I was single. I thought he's going to bring Ivanka. I was told, he said, Tony, if you'll do the fundraiser, nobody would do it in this area. And he said, they've asked this person and this person, and they're not going to ask you. And I said, shit, I'll do it. They said, bonus, Ivanka's going to come. I was like, woo, yes, let's go. And then she didn't show up.
Oh, dear. So your dreams were thwarted, crushed.
Thrown into the rocks.
But I think, as you said earlier, politics and law go hand in hand in Texas, and he did reference the fact that you have Democrat judges and you have Republican judges, and any lawyer is going to be mindful of how you have to play to appease both sides, as it were, or to play straight down the middle. So I think. Yeah, that's just... He's a pragmatist.
It greases the wheels as well, doesn't it? You often hear of people donating to both parties to support both parties.
Which I think is what he does.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a pragmatist.
Yeah, and a deal maker, probably quite transactional, like Donald Trump. If there's a deal to be done, he's there to do it.
Exactly.
Let's talk a bit about how he works as a lawyer. You go through in the interview quite a few times about the way that he operates in his cases. Do you want to just talk us through a little bit about how he plans the way he takes legal actions? Because it's not about going straight to court, is it?
No, it isn't. Well, and this has been a cause of great controversy over the last week or so, because he says this is standard practice, that what a personal injury lawyer will do, or certainly what he will do, is send out what's called a demand letter.
It's typical in the U.S. legal practice, before a formal lawsuit is filed, usually, and I don't do it in every case, but in these kinds of cases, because it's so stressful and overwhelming to the plaintiff herself or himself, because especially when it's against somebody who's high profile, it creates a lot of publicity, which makes it even more difficult.
Sure.
So we typically will send a demand letter. Basically, and I never put a number in there. I just usually send a letter that says, here's the facts that we have about you. this is confidential. We would like to, in 2 weeks, get together in a mediation. And if you do a mediation, then that's cloaked with also you have privilege, so nobody can talk about what was said. And try to resolve this without the filing of a public lawsuit.
This, as you can imagine, is quite controversial.
It can feel like a shakedown.
It can
feel like,
feel-
look, we can keep this between ourselves if you pay some money, or we do it the hard way.
Which is precisely what Jay-Z is now accusing him of. So one of these letters was sent to Jay-Z, and normally people would tend to keep quiet about this because they would think it was more advantageous to settle out of court, particularly if they're a public figure. But Jay-Z actually replied with great alacrity and with a degree of hostility, accusing Buzbee of blackmail. And the Jay-Z stuff has become quite an eventful sideshow, actually, to the Diddy case. And as a consequence of this, there's been a flurry of lawsuits over the last few days where Jay-Z's lawyers are suing Buzbee. Buzbee is suing Rock Nation, which is Jay-Z's company, alleging obstruction of justice. So it's all turning into a bit of a legal circus.
Well, Mick, we've heard a huge amount about Tony Buzbee, the man he is, something about the cases against P Diddy, but also the case against Jay-Z. What does he say about what his clients say about what happened to them?
He is representing more than 100 plaintiffs in this case. One of the main allegations is, and this has been widely reported, is that Sean Combs would hold these so-called freak-offs, parties where celebrities and all sorts of people would come to, and where at some point in the evening the whole thing would sort of degenerate into more or less an orgy. And the allegation that Buzbee is making on behalf of these plaintiffs is that many of them were, the normal pattern would be that someone has administered a date rape drug, GHB or something similar, might be in a bottle of water, might be in a small bottle of vodka. They then completely lose control. They go to la la land, as he puts it. They don't know what's happening to them. They're raped, they're sexually abused. It's part of the criminal action against Combs that these rapes and these sexual goings-on would be filmed for his own pleasure later on. He makes the point how difficult it is for people in sexual abuse cases, women particularly in sexual abuse cases, to actually come forward because they feel guilty, they feel shame, and they fear they're not going to be believed.
You're trying to put it together in your mind. Oh my God, your guilt, shame. How did I? Usually the argument is they make to themselves, how did I put myself in this position? And self-blame. But every day that they don't come forward makes it harder to come forward.
Right.
Because most people who don't understand sexual assault and don't understand this kind of thing will be very judgmental the longer somebody waits. Where I look at it, I say, I don't care how long you waited, you had the courage to step forward.
Right.
He's also very proud of the fact that he never advertises. He's not one of these lawyers that puts up a billboard on the corner of a street in California or in Texas, with a 1-800 number saying, "I'll look after you." He's described there as an ambulance-chasing lawyer, but more often the people in the ambulances are chasing him to represent them.
So he's not quite Better Call Saul.
He's not better.
Yes.
No, he is not Better Call Saul. I think he's several cuts above that. And so, over the last few months, more and more people have been coming to him, asking him to represent them. He also stresses that he doesn't just represent anybody. And he says, he has a lot of attention seekers, a lot of kooks, as he puts it, coming along. He employs a team of, he says, something like 100 different investigators. Some of them former PIs, some of them former cops, screeners, who interrogate these witnesses very, very thoroughly. And then he will see everybody, before he files a suit, he will see everybody, see all the people that he's filing suits on behalf of. And he says over the years he's come to be able to, smell. I've got a good smell test. He can smell the ones that. And he's very mindful of saying, look, I don't do these things willy-nilly. It's my reputation that's on the line. And I think the fact of the allegations, the accusations that have been made against him by Jay-Z about ambulance chasing lawyer, man in a cheap suit, in the posting that he put on X, Jay-Z actually sort of put lawyer in quote marks, as if he wasn't a lawyer at all. So I think he'd have been quite. He's wounded the right word. I mean, he's a man who you can see, it's water off a duck's back in a way. But I think this is an unusual degree of hostility that he's facing. Let's put it that way. And I think he is mindful that of stressing that he's. He goes about things professionally and his reputation is on the line.
Being attacked by people like Jay-Z, how else have there been others, and how's the media responded to this whole case and his role? Well,
I mean, there's been a feeding frenzy over this. I mean, not just over Jay-Z, going back to the very, very beginning of the charges against Diddy. X has been running amok with rumors about all sorts of people who might be involved in this. Socialites, celebrities. I mean, Buzbee said to me that he of course doesn't name anybody at this point, at least, but he sort of hinted there could be politicians involved in this. But he said, 90% of what you read on social media is foolishness. There's a lot of foolishness around this case. A lot of people whose names are being floated that he's completely unaware of.
There's a lot of foolishness out there. I don't read it all, but I hear about it, and about all the things related to this Diddy case, and I'd say 90% of it is foolishness. There was this idea that I have in my possession, like I'm Joe McCarthy or something, some sort of secret list. If you know American politics, Joe McCarthy was, he had the secret red list, and he would always wave it around, and he was going to out all these people, and he got all this attention. And I don't have no list like that. I mean, of course, I have a lot of people that have a lot of allegations to make, but it's not like I have some list that I intend to publish at some point. Somebody sent me something like, "Did you say this?" I was like, "No," but there was some report that I had said, "Pay up or be sued." That's not how I would operate. It's completely unprofessional. I would never do that. I have said that there's going to be some of the cases that there will be people who are named in the case that will raise some eyebrows.
So there's been this as I say, it's this feeding frenzy around the case, and over the last week or so, around Buzbee himself, not least because of the Jay-Z allegations and the way that Jay-Z has come out fighting on this.
Did he tell you anything about some of the losses, maybe? We heard a lot about the successes, the amazing deals he does. He's in probably one of the most, if not the most, high-profile case right now. Yeah. Did he say a couple of things, I suppose, people might be wondering. Does he think he's going to win? And what happens in the cases he loses? How does he feel about that?
Well, I asked him, when was the last time he lost a case? And there was this sort of a very long pause, which I think was slightly theatrical, because he did lose a case a couple of years ago. But he talked about when he was first starting out, and he was sort of hungry for money, hungry for success, hungry for recognition. And if he lost a case, he said he would basically sort of curl up in a fetal ball for 2 days and not be able to face the world. But nowadays, he gave an example of a case in Colorado last year where they won the case. He got £50 million in damages for his client. And he said he'd more or less forgotten about it before the time he'd flown back to Houston. I should add, flown back, that's in his own private jets, not anybody else's jet. He has 2 jets, actually. He also has a, and this is something that's often remarked on in profiles, he has a shark tattoo on his forearm. And this is matched by the shark motif on the tail fins of his private jets.
You write, Mick, that his jets, one is sort of short haul and one is longer haul, so presumably one's slightly bigger and more comfortable. Like you might have a small car for nipping to the shops and a slightly larger car for driving down to Devon. He has that, but in plane form.
Exactly. It's the Audi or the Smart, you know. I know he has a Challenger jet, which I understand is quite an expensive item to own and run. And yes, that's to fly into California or New York or around. But yeah, a smaller one for flying around Texas.
I assume, Mick, that he, to you, and probably genuinely as well, is confident that on this case he will win.
I don't think he's not a man to make himself a hostage to fortune in that way. You know, he didn't emphatically say, "I am going to win this case." He did talk about, of course, the Sean Combs, the Diddy case doesn't come up until next year, and he's got other cases that he's working on next May, in fact. He did talk about a case that he's going to be working on early next year, and he described what the process of this is, and he said that he has 26 lawyers working at his company, and he said they'll give him a briefing document. He'll get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, he'll read through it, he'll memorize it, he'll go to court, and then he'll prosecute the case or argue the case. And talking about this particular case, he said, I'll go there, everybody will have a good time, everybody will be entertained, and I'll win it.
You say in your piece that at one stage you had to go to a separate room in the house so that he could have a cigar. Just to wrap up this incredible conversation, and having heard so much of Tony Buzbee himself, it really is magnificent. But just as you left, Mick, you'd gone all this way, you'd been in this amazing house, you'd met this amazing character, you'd seen a sliver of American life that so few of us would ever experience or be able to experience. I just wondered what your sort of takeaway was as you left, presumably down the drive, and you sort of left this world of opulence. Just what was your take on Tony Buzbee?
Well, I walked out of his front door, and he shut the front door behind him, and I did indeed walk down his drive and then stood on the curb calling for an Uber. So it was
to normality.
Back to normality, very, very.
You didn't have your two jets waiting.
No, sadly not. No, I think my reflection was, as you described it, I mean, it was an extraordinary sort of 3 hours that I spent with him. He's an extraordinary character. He's very driven. He's much more reflective than his reputation might suggest. Looking at his bookshelves, which I do, it's always a very interesting indicator of someone's character. And they're among the sort of the law books and the books about politicians and international relations. Was a book by C.S. Lewis on Psalms. There was the Book of Disquiet by the Portuguese poet Pessoa. There was a book by Viktor Frankl on the nature of man's meaning. And we did have a long conversation about these kinds of subjects, where he's going, obviously, at this moment, and this is interesting, it should coincide with the P Diddy case. You know, he does seem to be going through this sort of reflection on his life and his past and where he's come to and what it all means. And he's, in a way, while we've talked about his fantastic sort of wealth and all his possessions, you know, he's been divesting himself of many of these possessions. And he was particularly keen to talk about one thing that he's acquired, the small town where he comes from. There's a church there, and there's a cemetery at the back of the church, which he, over the years, has paid to maintain. The church was falling into disrepair, so he has taken over the church, restored the church, and he's going to be inviting preachers from around the area to come and preach. And he said he might even talk there himself. So he's a much more complicated and interesting man, I think, than his image certainly suggests. And I have to say, he's a very entertaining one as well.
Mick Brown, thank you so much for joining the Daily Tea, for telling us all about Tony Buzbee, and for bringing him to life for us.
Thank you.